Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Windows on the World. As usual, I'm just reconnecting into chat. What always happens when I go live is it never actually shows up on the page that I've got open, which is the live shows page at windowsontheworld.net. So if you've never been there before, join us every Sunday, 9:30 p.m, live show page at windowsontheworld.net. It's quite an exclusive little club on there, actually, and it's always good fun. Yes, we are live, and I'm just checking that we are live. Yes, out there. Yes, I think we are. It says live here, so we must be. Next week, starting on Monday to Friday, I'm going to be doing shows on RBN, Republic Broadcasting Network, 6 p.m. UK time, which is basically 5 hours previous to that in Dallas, Texas. Well, that's where it comes out of. I'll be doing shows on RBN, Republic Broadcasting Network, Monday to Friday next week at 6 p.m. So, yes, getting on with tonight's show. The Great Reset. Are you a global citizen? Well, it's a good enough question, I think, because there has been talk over the past week of the Great Reset at the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum are, of course, at the forefront of pushing the globalist agenda. So, are you a globalist global citizen? Well, I'm actually not, and I don't want to be. I'm just checking that we're going out live. Yes, we're going out live. I don't know why I always have this problem every week. I think it's because I try and refresh a page and it doesn't look as though anything's going live. And a few people just panicked me now and they said, nothing's happening. But of course, there's a bit of a delay. So welcome, everybody. Yes. While you were looking the other way, do you know what happened? They just stole the world. The global distraction of Dumb Lives Matter and Antifa has really been used to cover up the fact that the beneficial crisis is starting to wane. The COVID-19 story is starting to get criticised and taken apart. But the role now, of course, is for the virtue signalling volunteers. I've been sent some hilarious footage and photographs of the virtue signallers kneeling on one knee, socially distancing, wearing masks while allegedly protesting. Well, of course, they're not protesting really, are they? They're volunteering. Yes, that's the role of the virtue signalling volunteers. The global citizens in the global community are interconnected. And that's a word that we hear an awful lot of, from Prince Charles to Charles Schwab. Yes, he's the head of the World Economic Forum. Prince Charles, now there is this theory that he's been changed or swapped, and there's a double as Prince Charles. Now, this is not as far-fetched as it sounds, because the person who is Prince Charles at the World Economic Forum and who was interviewed recently on Sky TV does not look very much like the old Prince Charles. He looks to have put some weight on, and he's got very chubby hands. He looks as though he's got something wrong with him, like high blood pressure or something. But it really doesn't look like Prince Charles as far as the physique goes. The features, yes, interesting one, but I haven't got time to get into that. Does it really matter if the royal family have been replaced? No, it doesn't. Not at the moment. There's much bigger things to worry about, because obviously they are part of sustainable development and they are under the thumb of the World Health Organization, the UN, the World Economic Forum, the IMF and the World Bank. So people who say that they are sovereign, maybe they need to look at who's really in charge. Let's get on with this. Yeah. The global citizens in the global community are all interconnected. They are all working for the same goal. The common goal is the common good. Yes, David Cameron in 2010 came out with the Big Society. This has been ongoing ever since, and I've talked about it in so many shows. It is, in essence, communitarianism. From the far right to the far left and everything in between. No one will be left behind. Everything will be hoovered up into the hive mind. From Black Lives Matter to Extinction Rebellion, from Occupy to Antifa. They are working inside the system of moods. There's something for everyone. Yeah, climate change, identity politics, and collective causes. And collective causes are what the big society, UN Agenda 2030, sustainable development and communitarianism is all about. Collective cause. No one will be left behind. Remember that the globalists need the anti-globalists to implement their policies. And the anti-globalists need the globalists to fund and steer them. So the anti-globalists implement the policies of the globalists. Now, you try telling that to some of these idiots who go down to these protests. They think they're protesting. They're actually volunteering for another rollout and part of an agenda. The protests are for all global citizens, just like the Citizens' Assembly, the People's Assembly. These were all contrived, controlled events. The People's Assembly, people got bussed in. They had their placards given to them. Would you like the Socialist Workers' Party? Would you like to support the NHS? Or would you like to support one of the unions? Or would you like something else? We've got a sign for you. We bus you all in. You go to Trafalgar Square. You have your day out. You think your voice has been heard. You listen to some worthy union rep who's just a change agent and can't do anything and has been replaced and put in there. Basically, the person who they're replacing was somebody of integrity, because in the new system there can't be any integrity. They're all change agents. If they're not, they will get kicked out and someone else will be put in their place. So yes, I remember all that stuff. I remember the Women's March, funded by the European Central Bank and George Soros. The Women's March was really an anti-Trump protest where people actually didn't know what they were there for. It was called the Women's March. So what they do is they'll confuse it with an already existing event like International Women's Day. So what they did on this Women's March was, it was basically like anti-Trump and what else? I can't really remember, but they were there wandering about. I asked one of them why she was protesting, because obviously they weren't protesting, they were just walking about with these placards. She said, because I have a daughter, which kind of stumped me really, because I thought, well, why are you protesting about the fact you've got a daughter? But this is the post-truth world. It's absolutely incredible. But the protests are all for global citizens. Take a side. It doesn't matter which one, because they're all the same. The protests drive division, distraction, and most importantly, they push forward the agenda on multipolar fronts. Now, that's really important because, of course, we had this joke idea of the far right against the Antifa far left and Black Lives Matter. It doesn't really matter which side you're on, because these are just drivers for global governance. But anybody who's outside global governance is described as far right. And that was quite funny. We're going to get onto that tonight because there's some really good examples of that over the past few days, which border on comedy. Well, they are comedy, really. The chaos works. The public want tighter controls and solutions. The public want to be saved. They are given the solutions. The outcomes were all planned beforehand. And the public then demand what they are given. The divide and rule, the left, the right, the virus goes and comes back stronger. The second wave, yeah, that's going to happen. The global reset, saving the world. Something for everyone. The system of moods, this is what it's called. All differences create division. So, in the new system, you have to join the hive mind because it's for the common good. And what that in effect means is that key players have been identified to engage the stakeholders. Social justice, have you heard of this? Yeah. Be the change you want to see and we'll show you how to do it. That's what this is all about. Isn't it incredible that people actually go out there and they comply with the government whilst they're meant to be protesting, and they're protesting for what global governance wants them to do. Very hard for them to understand that though, because the word protest is completely misused. To be protesting these days, you have to take up a contrary position and these people don't. It's called a system of moods working on multipolar fronts. Now, I'm going to give you a quote from Amitai Etzioni. He was actually born with the name Werner Falk, but he changed his name to Tree of Zion. Oh, he's a Zionist, yes, but apart from that, he's the world's most respected and go-to authority on communitarianism. He actually advises governments. Did you know about this? No, he's at Washington State University, I believe, and he's extraordinarily influential in what we're talking about tonight, in global citizenship, communitarianism. Now, what he said, this is a quote from Amitai Etzioni. I've given you a few quotes of his in the past. The world needs a new global architecture, additional layers of governance to deal with issues that neither nations nor traditional forms of intergovernmental organisations can cope with. Interesting. This is Social Engineering 101. The world's leading proponent of the new system, that was Amitai Etzioni. Global governance for global citizens, the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum. More about that a bit later in the show. But all the agents are in place and have been since 2010. Everyone in public office is a change agent. That's why when you go to complain about something, you basically get brushed off. They lie about what you've said, or they don't respond to what you've said. Have you had this response from authority? I have quite a few times. And it gets worse, because under this system of law, this communitarian system of law, if you're deemed to be outside their controlled narrative, then you are the enemy. And even if you are legally and lawfully right, you will still be wrong. Sounds like totalitarianism. Wait a minute, I think it is totalitarianism. Anyone and everyone, yes, your local representatives, doesn't matter who they are, councillors, civil servants, police, MPs, your Prime Minister, they are all change agents. They are all agents for the new system. The World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, you thought it was global to local. Well, you were told it was global to local. It's actually local to global. So all of these people that you deal with on a daily basis are globalists. The public are enablers because they don't know any better. They are not addressing the issue. Therefore, they're part of the hive mind. They're going out clapping for the NHS when they should be asking the NHS why so many old people were sent out of hospital to infect other people in old people's homes when they were sat 6 inches from each other in front of a plasma screen. Did they know that this thing might spread? They were telling us it was going to spread, wasn't it? Also, yes, the trained facilitators and agents of change run everything, and no one will be left behind. There will be a new social contract in harmony with nature. Did you know about this? This is what the World Economic Forum are saying. A new social contract in harmony with nature, harnessing science, technology, and guess what? Zero carbon emissions. So we're going from 82% of fossil fuels to nothing. This is rationing, this is depopulation, this is sustainable development. Sustainable recovery based on UN Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement. That's what the World Economic Forum is saying this week. Prince Charles, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, let's get on to what he had to say. He said, we did not have the answers or mechanisms to deal with it. Climate change surpasses COVID-19, said His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, or whoever's standing in for him. He's been implanted with the words which deceive. He says we've got to restore balance and biodiversity. He says the planet is a patient and we are damaging her immune system. We need unity, diversity and interdependence. Now, this is quite scary, really, because this man has been brought up and educated, yet he's spouting stuff which is part of a global hive mind. These are not his words. They are their words. These are not his ideas. They are their ideas. The misleaders have their own meanings. The public cannot speak this language. They don't understand it because the words do not mean what the public believe they mean. They are, though, allowed to repeat it, and it is implanted through all media and, of course, this very, very limited vocabulary. We must create momentum in the Great Reset, said Charles. Yeah, of course, no one will be left behind. He says we must have a circular bioeconomy. We must give back to nature what we take from her. Unless you are the preferred partner, of course, and immune, in which case do what thou wilt, which is what the globalists do. They are the preferred partners, they are the stakeholders, they have the interest, they can do whatever they want, it's just that you can't. You are being told to pay benefice for being on the earth. You are going to pay for your sins through restriction of all your rights, carbon taxation, and of course an early death. This is what they want. They say we must accelerate sustainable energy, invest in nature-based solutions. Well, this is a lie, of course. It's rationing and restriction for all. Global poverty, the loss of all interdependence. The loss of all independence for interdependence, meaning technocratic control, the end of all rights. Capture the will of humanity, he says. Yes, you will be captive, a slave with no choice, but interdependence. He talks about carbon pricing, net zero emissions. The elite talk about our collective progress. They have their own system with absolute freedom from all interaction with the microchipped slaves of sustainability, which is what they want everyone to be. Yes, we are on the verge of a catalytic breakthrough to a sustainable future, says Charles. Green energy, the regeneration of nature. According to His Royal Highness, each and every one of us has a role to play. And that's exactly what people have been doing, isn't it? Do you think those people on those protests are protesting? No, they are role-playing. That's all they are doing. He says climate change and pandemics know no boundaries. This is almost word for word of what the Club of Rome was saying in their documents over 30 to 40 years ago. It's exactly the same thing. The first global revolution, limits to growth, the previous document. Look it up. All of this stuff that he's spouting has been implanted into his mind, and he then wants it to go into the hive mind. This is because we are all, according to them, tools of global governance. Let's have a look now at what communitarianism means. We're talking about this a lot these days because when I started talking about this about 10 years ago, I've often referred to it as the hive mind, basically this system of Agenda 2030. But it is all based on this philosophy and political ideology of communitarianism. Let's see what the actual description of that is. A political and social philosophy that emphasises the importance of community in the functioning of political life. Well, there you go. There's your citizens' assemblies. They're part of the community, aren't they? But they're not. Because you're going to be mentored into being part of a group which is being steered in a direction and the outcome has already been predicted and planned. There's one choice, no choice. You're duty-bound to participate in pointless group activities such as fake protests and manufactured agendas which fall under the banner of sustainable development. Yes, Black Lives Matter on their website. They talk about sustainability. The well-being of the community is that there is a steering process and you are merely allowed to take part in it. We're going to go through what is the intended outcome of the beneficial crisis of COVID-19 and the groupthink engineered fake protests. That's what we're doing on this show, and we're going to get more deeper into it because I've got quotes from the World Economic Forum, this preemptive meeting for this Davos assembly when, of course, everything's going to be in place. They've already announced it. They've already announced that history is being changed and airbrushed. Well, we can see that at the present time, can't we? The airbrushing of history and the control of all narratives, the shutting down of facts, this is essential. The Great Reset has cemented sustainable development and the technocracy is the new normal. The state is under global governance and there is no longer a UK government. This has been so apparent watching the Three Stooges on their podiums with Boris Johnson looking more and more disempowered and discombobulated. Yeah. Idea, nature and characteristics of communitarian law. Let's look at that next. Give you a bit of an insight. This is a quote by Marja Sahadic. It was about a workshop on communitarianism. This will give you an insight into what the future is and what the present is manufacturing. The workshop analysed the definition of the term communitarianism, which was in essence understood to mean community empowerment. That's what I was talking about with the change agent. I did this years ago talking about big society change agents. There's an article on windowsontheworld.net, big society change agents. Have a look at it. I mean, we were talking about this. We started to see it really coming into operation in 2014. That's when the road closures started to happen, the lobbying groups, the NGOs, the change agents, the local newspapers, which were to change society forever. And now we're seeing the results of it all. But the agenda driving the governance of all is as totalitarian as any genocidal dictatorship. It just takes control by infiltration and ideology. The vocabulary becomes so narrow, there is no room for dissent and it will never be heard. It is not on the agenda. So we're going to get into some of this stuff about community empowerment. Okay, yeah. So by 2010, we already had the big society in the UK under David Cameron. We had Obama's army in America, social justice warriors, the social organisers, the community organisers, the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals. We've covered all this on previous shows. Saul Alinsky, the radical housing campaigner who wanted to take power by any means necessary. And we see the result of that philosophy. We see the audacity of these people, the liars in public office. The things they come up with to justify their actions are laughable. Yes, the NGOs sprouted up and the community organisers and community leaders parachuted into positions all over the country and indeed all over the world. Now, there's one in public office everywhere. Every single person in public office is a change agent who is not a functioning cog, but part of a global action plan and the hive mind. So they work as part of the agenda. It says here, communitarianism seeks to confront and resolve problems by community discourse and action. Now, this is interesting because I saw an example of this at Occupy London. What they actually mean is that the outcome is already predicted. The people just have to be steered into it. And they resolve problems by community discourse with facilitated meetings. This is what councils do. This is called Delphi technique. Every public meeting in the UK is run under a thing called Delphi technique, with facilitators, co-facilitators steering you into the intended outcome, invented by the Rand Corporation in 1953. The facilitators and agents of change will allow nothing else but the intended outcome. So there's one choice, no choice. Let's see what else it says here from this quote. It says, it recognises that the community is the essential stakeholder and must be ultimately responsible for its own development processes. The community is the essential stakeholder, so everyone has to be part of it. And the community must be ultimately responsible for its own development process. That just means that there's no choice. It just means that basically you've got a totalitarian system run by the people who are educated into sustainable development or totalitarianism. Yes, Delphi technique and the shutdown of everything which is not steering the participants into the intended outcome. The public-private partnerships and nose in the trough communitarians are all rewarded. I've seen so many of them, from MPs to cabinet members for the environment. They've all lied to me. They've all been disingenuous and they're all worthless as public servants. They're narcissistic, vacuous and extremely well rewarded. Even if they mean well, they're not able to see outside the box they are in, as they have been told there is no other box. There isn't anything else. They will take down your concerns and bin them because they don't need to hear them. Let's see what else it says in this quote about communitarianism. The communitarian approach requires sound leadership, a community development mission and action programs, dedicated resources and institutional connectedness with the people. And this is local government they're talking about here. Sound leadership, in other words, change agents. A community development mission. That means public-private partnerships dictating what's going to happen in your area. Action programs. Yes, all of the useful idiots promoted who are there merely to steer the agenda into the intended outcome. Yes, an intended goal, usually about restricting rights based on sustainable development and fake environmental principles, all done with this illusion of public participation. Let's see what else it says. One primary difference between individual rights and human rights is that under individual rights, the burden of proof always rests on the state, whereas the more moral communitarian idea of human rights puts the burden of proving innocence on the accused. Yes, you heard that right. So if the mob don't like you, diversity may no longer apply. So people who are criminalised under communitarianism are presumed guilty until they're proven innocent. Now, 55% of all examined cases by the CPS and Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Courts found that in those 55% of all examined cases, essential defence evidence was being withheld. So this is what they're talking about here. You can be found guilty with no evidence in this country, and your evidence, your defence evidence, will be blocked and obfuscated, and you will be steered into the outcome, just as in the Delphi technique. Yes. Would you like to plead guilty now and get a third off your sentence? That's what they tell you when you go into court. So the new utopian community is actually intolerant and will do absolutely anything to silence and take out anyone who they believe gets in their way. This is where the entirely disingenuous system is absolutely exposed, and the mob will rule if you let them. I've had to deal with many instances of this, even recently. And community-type newspapers. Have you heard of this Live group? They've libelled people I know several times, and they do it under a thing called qualified privilege, which in the cases that I've examined and are on windowsontheworld.net, have a look. You can actually see 5G campaigners basically being demonised by this Live group because, of course, they're outside the controlled narrative. Anything outside that is demonised. Have a look at Windows on the World in the articles section. You'll see how people are demonised. Have a look at Welsh that's called Fact-Free Welsh News Fails. You'll see what they did to us when we went to talk to people in Fairborn in North Wales. The local Labour Party attacked me, so did the local newspaper, and I gave them all of the information. Was it fair and balanced, what they said? No. I was a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, and I thought Elvis lived on the dark side of the moon. This is what they do, as we know. Well, anyone who listens to the show knows this. But basically, this Live group is run by Reach PLC. And look at your local paper, and you will find it's probably owned by the Live group, Reach PLC. Just look up Reach PLC. They also own Mirror newspapers, The Express, The Daily Star, The Daily Record, The Sunday Mail, The Western Mail, Wales on Sunday, Sunday People. Check online. Your local paper is probably included along with the Communitarian Live online rag for actually community shaming. Yes, they do a lot of community shaming in there, and they think they have the right to do it. These people should be taken to task for what they're doing. And the people that they're employing have been trained by organisations who are completely on board with this kind of social justice, neoliberalism, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, fake community organising, fake protesting narrative. They're all on board with it, and they'll demonise anyone who's outside it. So it is impossible to prove you did not commit the crime of behaving or thinking in a way that might potentially cause harm to the expanded definition of the common good. So in other words, when you hear this phrase, the common good, it's been utterly usurped, and the common good means the totalitarian state. It means you have no rights, and if you get in their way, they'll do what they want to you. We are living under this system. It's not a conspiracy theory. So in other words, the NHS seal clapping and crouching on one knee make you a part of the community. This is classed as good community engagement, and if you don't get involved, then you're full of hate, or you're even a right-wing extremist. Now, the interesting thing about this mob rule is that domestic terrorism is allowed by the police. The idiots who get down on one knee and virtue signal are showing their allegiance to mob rule, and you see the police doing this. So in the last few days, a good example of communitarian law has actually emerged. Now, before we go into this story, because it's quite a good example of communitarian law, how it's being imposed. Now, I'm just going to preempt this story with the offence of urinating in the street is a £45 fine, a kind of fixed penalty, really. But if you're not Antifa or Black Lives Matter, then you're outside the narrative and you must be far right. This is from BBC News and a fine example of what we're talking about here. BBC News. A man has been arrested on suspicion of urinating at the Westminster Memorial dedicated to PC Keith Palmer. Now, this is interesting because he wasn't actually peeing on the memorial. He was peeing through the railings. Now, I'm not saying that was a good idea, but it's probably someone who was a bit drunk, or maybe he had something wrong with him. I mean, people sometimes do have to go to the toilet. You know, he might have had a prostate problem, something like that. I'm not kind of condoning pissing in the street, by the way. This is just a good example of how this system is working. It says the incident is believed to have taken place on Saturday afternoon. Now, wait a minute. Every Saturday night when the pubs are open in town centres, there's people urinating all over the place. If the police catch them, they'll probably give them a fine. Okay, it's not going to be on BBC News, is it? It's not going to be on the BBC News website naming and shaming. It's not going to be put into newspapers naming and shaming. This is what I'm talking about. And then it goes into this virtue signalling, which got nothing to do with it. They talk about this PC Palmer, who was stabbed while on duty during the Westminster terror attack of 2017. So what they're doing is they're basically saying that he's peeing on the memory of this person. Well, of course he wasn't. He was peeing through the railings next to it. Allegedly, it even says allegedly, right? The Met police officers had arrested a man on suspicion of outraging public decency. He is currently in custody in Essex after presenting himself at a police station. Well, why on earth would he do that? They only got the back of his head. What was the point of all that, I wonder? Now, this is not an offence that warrants being detained either. So this is interesting. So he's in custody. Why would he be in custody? You'd be released and bailed straight away, or it'd be if it's a fixed penalty fine, then you wouldn't be bailed, would you? You just pay it. So this person is being treated differently, and this is what I'm talking about, because he was actually just peeing through the railings next to the plaque. This is the sort of thing, as I said, that happens every weekend in cities all over the world. So why is this person being shown up as some kind of extremist? Because he's outside the narrative of controlled opposition. If he was Black Lives Matter, wouldn't have been touched. Antifa wouldn't have been touched. But he's part of a group which has been deemed to be far right. Now, this is interesting. So it's because there was not enough trouble, really, at this so-called far-right rally against BLM and Antifa, right? So they have their little childish protests. You know, they go there for the day out, and then they go home again. But scapegoats were needed and found. Now, another amusing aspect was in The Guardian, where they called the group who were defending statues against vandalism far-right thugs. And it was so contradictory, it sounded sort of absurdly comedic, as the rhetoric didn't match the quotes that they printed. Now, this was this Britain First leader, Paul Golding. Now, Britain First, to me, is not even worth talking about. They are an antagonistic divide and rule operation. And I don't think they are what they say on the tin. I've covered all these sort of fake groups. I think they're pretty fake, in my own opinion. And if they're not fake, well, they're not necessary because they don't do anything. They're not solving a problem. All they're doing is part of the dialectic. They're going up against the immigrant. Well, there's no point doing that because you've got to go up against the UN because they're the ones who are bringing the immigrant in under the UN Migration Compact. So there's no point going on that level. It won't get you anywhere. And these people, I think, know that. But to be fair, it said Paul Golding had been quoted as saying that there's a group of men who were there to defend the statues from being defaced. Now, what on earth is wrong with that? So in the next breath, they're calling them far-right thugs, and the quote is that they're there to defend the statues from being damaged and vandalised. Well, surely that's what the police should be doing, right? It's the job of the police, but the police are letting vandalism happen because Black Lives Matter and Antifa are part of sustainable development and, of course, the Great Reset. This is Communitarianism 101. It was the same with Extinction Rebellion. The police let them park that pink yacht in the middle of London and they blocked as many roads as they wanted and they got away with it. But for those of us not dumb enough to get caught up in this is also no excuse. We're meant to be out there narcissistically virtue signalling. Did you not know? We're meant to be joining in, clapping like seals and kneeling for the dead criminal who was allegedly killed by an Israeli chokehold. Yes, that officer who was kneeling on that fella's neck, and this happens a lot, this is what they do in Palestine. It's the Israelis who are teaching the police to do this. No one's really brought that up, but I think it's a very worthwhile thing to say because you shouldn't be doing it anyway. But one of the problems of being trained in these Israeli detention tactics is the police are now ready for violence. This is communitarian, as if you are seen to be outside the narrative, then you are on the balance of probabilities a criminal in the eyes of the community. So, if the mob are sustainable, vibrant and diverse, they rule, you obey, or get punished. There are remedies. But as these people will lie to get the result they want, it's very stressful for the average person who's not schooled in Saul Alinsky rules or just plain terrorism. Because we're talking about domestic terrorism here. What we are seeing with these people is domestic terrorism. And I think we can all see that. I'm going to have a quick break and I'm going to come back with the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum.
So fine, there's a Cajun queen for the Cajun dreams. Gonna give you some of the time. Without it, Smarty Jack. Without it, Smarty Jack. Without it, Smarty Jacks. Have a good time. Smarty Jack, just a railroad track. A house with a neon sign. And then Cajun queen for the Cajun dream. Gonna give you some of the time. Without it, Smarty Jack. Without it, Smarty Jack. Without it, Smarty Jack. Have a good time. And the color go go. The color go go. The color go go. The color go go. Smarty Jacks. Without it, Smarty Jack. Without it, Smarty Jacks. Have a good time. Say man, don't pick no fight with me. Without it, Smarty Jacks. Without it, Smarty Jacks. Without it, Smarty Jacks. Have a good time. And the color go go. The color go go. The color go go. The color go go.
Great little musical interlude there from Ian Terry and Smiley Jacks. It's actually an album that Ian put out, I think, last year. Might have even been the year before. I did a gig with him down at the Monarch in Camden about, God, it must be 18 months ago now. What a great night that was. Fantastic. Getting people up singing on stage. I love doing that old rock and roll stuff. And Ian's one of these very spontaneous rock and rollers. In other words, when we do a set, it would be, well, what are we doing, Ian? He goes, well, I don't know, whatever you want. That's the way I like it. It's great. Fantastic stuff. Yeah, now let's get back to this. The Great Reset. Are you global citizens out there? Do you know about the Great Reset? Have you heard about it? You probably have if you listen to the show. Go to the World Economic Forum website and take a look. But the beneficial crisis of COVID-19 has paved the way for the rapid implementation of sustainable development, the UN Agenda 2030, and of course, wait for it, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So let's have a look at what it says here. Now, the stakeholders, the globalist stakeholders, and this World Economic Forum, Great Reset, were Prince Charles, International Monetary Fund Chief Kristalina Georgieva, and BP Chief Executive, wait for it, Bernard Looney. They were among the participants in the online launch of the Great Reset. The globalist stakeholders included, I'm going to give you a bit of detail here because I like to put a lot of info into these shows. So it says the announcement of the Great Reset was made by HRH, the Prince of Wales, or whoever's in his shoes, and Professor Schwab, that's Charles Schwab, who started off the World Economic Forum, during a virtual meeting, followed by statements of the US Secretary General and the IMF Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva. Their statements were supported by voices from all stakeholder groups of global society, including Victoria Alonso Perez, founder and chief executive officer of ChipSafer, Uruguay, young global leader Caroline Anstey, president and CEO of Pact USA, AJ Banja, CEO of MasterCard, Sharon Burrow, Secretary of the International Trade Union of Confederation from Brussels, Ma Jun, Chairman of the Green Finance Committee and the China Society for Finance and Banking, and a member of the Monetary Policy Committee of the People's Bank of China. Of course, Bernard Looney of BP, Juliana Rotich, venture partner of Atlantic Ventures Kenya, Bradford L. Smith, President of Microsoft USA, Nick Stern, CEO of the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. Oh my God, they are an absolute globalist lobbying body. Talk about not needing any facts. Charles Schwab, of course, head of the World Economic Forum. And he said, we need to change our mindsets, did Charles Schwab. Business would contribute to environmentally healthy social cohesion and good governance. Oh, that's all right then. There would be a task force assembled in Davos in January. He said we will mobilise our 10,000 global shapers in cities all over the world to organise a twin summit to interact continuously with those in Davos to ensure we do not fall back to old recipes. They're not messing about here, you know. This is going to be the fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and the rollout of everything that we've been talking about. Yes, he says, what is the alternative? Well, the alternative is that we don't want a technocratic dictatorship in it. He said, instead of being cynical or critical, we should get on board and integrate everyone in the world. The global citizens must unite behind the corporate governance of the IMF and World Bank. No one will be left behind, you see. This is what they're hoping. So here's the summary. Let's have a summary of what the Great Global Reset is all about. The Great Reset will be the theme of a unique twin summit in January 2021. Convened by the World Economic Forum. The Great Reset is a commitment to jointly and urgently build the foundations of our economic and social system for a more fair, sustainable, and wait for it, resilient future. It requires a new social contract, you're going to love this one, centred on, guess what? Human dignity, social justice, and where the societal the societal progress does not fall behind economic development. So, bearing in mind that the duty of every global citizen is to join in or be demonized, this social contract is a technocratic dictatorship. They're talking about it. The new social contract will be in harmony with nature. This is what was talked about in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit. These are the ideas of people like Maurice Strong, to be in harmony with nature. Oh, where else does it say that? On the Georgia Guidestones, wasn't it? 500,000 people in harmony with nature. Yes, that's quite a depopulation. I wonder if they're going to go for it straight away. It says they're harnessing science and technology. Yes, AI smart control. Zero carbon emissions. Can you hear this? Now, it was meant to be by 2030, wasn't it? Or 2050. Then it's 2030 and it's now. So this fake flu pandemic, or the fake pandemic of flu, or the virus, the mind virus, has paved the way for zero carbon emissions. Who would have thought it? Who would have thought this possible? Who would have thought it was possible for the public to be so stupid and not get this? Because a lot of them don't, do they? It says sustainable recovery will be based on United Nations Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement. Now, Prince Charles said, we did not have the answer or the mechanisms to deal with it. Well, how would he know? The dangers of climate change surpass COVID-19. It's incredible, isn't it? He said we have to restore balance and biodiversity. The planet is a patient, he said, and we are damaging her immune system. He spoke of unity, diversity, and interdependence. Yes, the implanted vocabulary of globalist technocrats. Now, this bloke, he can't have just come up with this himself, can he? Because he spouted a very narrow word salad. The only spontaneous thing he said during the whole thing was hello and goodbye. And that was pretty mannered, to be fair. He said we need a circular bioeconomy. We need to give back to nature what we take from her. In other words, every human action has a cost. If you step on a blade of grass, that means that you have to grow that blade of grass back again. This is the micromanagement that they're talking about. I'm not exaggerating here. This, of course, means rationing, taxation, restriction of everything, overpriced energy, and new Agenda 2030 legislation, all for the fake green agenda. He talked of redesigning systems and pathways. Who put this in his highly inactive and minuscule brain? Well, we know, don't we? Technocrats, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations. Programmed with a globalist word salad, HRH, spouted disingenuous phrases and statements using language as a tool of deception. He talked of nature-based solutions. The globalist agenda is nothing to do with solutions or nature. They all talk about the end of fossil fuels. That's what he was talking about, the end of fossil fuels, which means rationing and overpriced energy. He talked of capturing the will of humanity. That's communitarianism. No one will be left behind. We're all in it together. That is about it. Hijacking and capturing is what it's all about. Even sustainable employment gets a mention. A transition to net zero carbon emissions, meaning depopulation, control and starvation when suitable. The cliches never stopped during his speech. Green energy, the regeneration of nature, which basically means closing off more and more land, privatising the global commons, restriction of everything, which is what the Wild 11 conference was meant to be this year. But because they didn't actually meet up, they're just putting this stuff in behind the scenes. And of course, this has projected it all into the present. They don't have to talk about it. It's all coming in now. They've just used the COVID-19 to bring in technocracy. That's all it was there for. And of course, the Black Lives Matter and the Antifa nonsense and all the rest of it is just a distraction to keep you looking the other way while they're doing it. Finally, the lookalike of HRH said, each and every one of us has a role to play. Indeed, we have a role to play. This is, of course, the big society, the global community. We all have a duty to facilitate our own techno-slavery and our early demise for the greater good. For, yes, our common purpose. Now let's have a look what the managing director of the IMF had to say. That's Kristalina Georgieva. She's from Bulgaria. Right, she says, think what history would say about this crisis. Well, we know what history's going to say. It was manufactured load of garbage and it was all based on lies. That's what history's actually going to say, unless they rewrite it, of course, which they are busily doing at the present moment. What could it take, she says, for history to look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset? Well, you've just said it was. It's not that we're going to look at history and say that. You already have said that it is the great opportunity. So that's going to go down in history that you said it. But by the time people realise that they're enslaved, you may no longer be there anymore. She says, we want a greener, smarter and more fairer world in the future. Can you see? Have they been training these people? Have they been restricting their vocabulary since birth? Well, they've certainly been restricting their vocabulary since employment, haven't they? She says public-private investments and low carbon resilience. Eliminate harmful subsidies. Eliminate harmful subsidies. That means that anyone not going along with a climate-related disclosures task force run by Mark Carney will be bankrupted. Medium-sized organisations are going to be bankrupted by these globalist technocrat organisations. She said we need rapid growth in digital and sharing of benefits across society. She said the pandemic will deepen inequality. Well, wait a minute, it's their pandemic, so that must have been the plan, right? I mean, the World Economic Forum predicted it, the World Health Organization enabled it with a bit of help from Bill Gates, and it was put into the policies of every government around the world how to deal with it. So what is she talking about here? The pandemic will deepen inequality because you wanted it to. Inequality is what makes the globalist world go round. They thrive on identifying problems, and we are the problem, as stated by the Club of Rome. In the absence of war, famine and the like, the common enemy of humanity is mankind. That's what they said. She said the IMF, wait for this one, the IMF has a $1 trillion lending capacity. A $1 trillion lending capacity. This is a great reset, she said, not a reversal. The best memorial for pandemic victims is a greener, smarter, fairer world. That's the best memorial for the pandemic victims. Techno-slavery. So, quite a lot of info there, but I thought it was important to get that stuff out. I'll be back to a more conversational type discourse on Monday to Friday. Monday to Friday, Republic Broadcasting Network. That's RBN in Austin, Texas. 6 p.m. every day, Monday to Friday. I'll be joined with a variety of guests, including Sandy Adams and a few new ones. What I don't do usually is get on the people who do the rounds. You know, these people who get loads of YouTube hits, like this Dr. Buttar. He's very good. You know, some of the stuff that they put out is great. And I get sent so much of this kind of stuff that I think most people who listen to us have probably seen it. So I don't want to get people on just saying what we already know they're going to say. So I'm going to bring on people who have a conversational kind of way of putting things across, and people who are putting really good stuff out, but maybe are not as well known as a lot of the other people in the so-called alternative media. I'll be doing quite a bit of that. And of course, do support us on PayPal, Patreon. And yes, the film is going to be out at some point. I'm going to get this trailer up over the next week. I'm really pleased with it. It's actually a taster of the film, The Heretics of London, the Smithfield Martyrs. It's really interesting. And there's so many stories from that period of time, and it actually draws a great parallel with now, because heretic, you know what heretic means? It just means able to choose. A heretic is someone who is able to choose. So our show puts out information for heretics, really. And we are seeing an absolute backlash against people who are outside the controlled, narrow opinion. And I think sovereignty is essential. By that I mean standing in your own self, not the implanted word salad of these idiots. It doesn't matter whether they're protesters or they're enablers, or whether they're the change agents themselves, whether they are HRH, the Prince of Wales, or whoever he is, the head of the World Bank, the IMF. It doesn't matter who they are. They all have been changed and implanted with a narrow vocabulary which means nothing to most people. But because myself and a lot of the listeners can easily decode this stuff, we know the full horror of what they're talking about. Well, that's it for tonight. Been a very warm day today, actually. I don't think I've got sunstroke, but I've been I've been hit by the sun, which is a good thing. So I'm getting some vitamin D. Thanks a lot to everyone in chat. And thanks for listening. I'll be back tomorrow. And I will be back for another live stream next week. I don't do these live streams every week now because I want to have something really fresh to say. I want it to be very information orientated. So I'll be back next week with a live one probably. And also I'm on Bryza tomorrow night. It's I think there's going to be something on Facebook about it. And I'll be on a show, I think 10 o'clock with Larkin, Texas and John Waters. That's a great little double act or triple act. I think it works really well with myself, John and Lark because we've all got big bits of the jigsaw puzzle. And I think it is very rounded. Well, I'd like to think so anyway. That's it anyway for good night, everybody. Thanks for listening and see you all on Windows on the World. Thanks a lot. Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net.